Well, thank you for joining us and taking some time to hear what Justin and I have found about the physiological and emotional impacts of a pornography addiction. This is a topic we chose because it's kind of something that's pretty current in our world today. It's something that isn't too openly discussed, but the mainstream media, in a lot of TV shows, movies, things like that, portrays pornography usage as very normal and acceptable. And so we kind of wanted to see what the research said as far as what are the consequences of pornography media usage, and what does that mean for an individual and for relationships. And we found that although it's like very positively portrayed in media, there is still a negative stigma in society. Down here over here in the corner, this is a study that was conducted with some college students, and one of the key findings was that these individuals that self-reported their pornography usage did not find any negative consequences as far as their personal relationships with others were concerned, but they did feel there was a negative stigma to their usage, or they felt that society in general wouldn't feel that it was acceptable. It wasn't something they were proud to disclose. So there is kind of this yin and yang thing happening where the media in general, I perceive, says it's a positive thing, but individually, I think some of us recognize that maybe it's a negative thing. So we wanted to know, what does it mean in general? So to set the stage here are some statistics. Every second, 28,000 people are watching pornography on the internet. Every day, 68 million people are searching for pornographic media. And there's an estimated 40 million Americans that regularly visit pornographic sites. So is it a problem? There are some studies that suggest that the earlier the exposure to sexual content, the more likely there is for a teenage pregnancy. They also suspect that that could be related to a lack of proper sexual education in the home or the school, and that's why these kids are going out on the internet and seeking these things out. So there's some question there. Another study reported that 56% of divorces cited an obsessive interest in pornographic websites as one of the reasons they were having an issue with their partner. But again, there's a question of, was the problem there and the individual sought out the pornography to satisfy a sexual desire, or vice versa? We don't know. What we do know, and we did find, is there is a neurobiological impact to the use of pornographic media. There's a term called neuroplasticity, which basically means that with persistent stimuli, the physical volume of the brain changes. Similar to when you exercise a muscle, it gets bigger. When you don't use it, it atrophies. And what was found is that there's an inverse relationship. So the pornographic media consumption causes certain areas of the brain to become smaller. One of those areas, the caudate nucleus, is involved in learning, memory, reward, motivation, emotion, and romantic interaction. So you can kind of hypothesize where this is going. If that area is getting smaller, there's going to be some complications there. In addition, there was a similar trend with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive function, decision-making, memory, and maintaining an inhibition to inappropriate responses. So if these areas are becoming smaller, there are issues with coping, with decision-making, and other executive functions that can be negatively affected with increased pornography use. There's also research that supports that men who used online sexual media to reduce stress may have actually increased their depression or other issues. There is the issues of betrayal or disinterest in a romantic relationship because of the use of pornography. And really what it boils down to is one of two outcomes. Because of the design of our brain and the neurotransmitter functions in our brain, what happens with pornography usage can go one of two ways depending on how a person's brain decides to work. And they don't really know why it goes one way or the other, but there have been two generally accepted outcomes. Those are, first, just to kind of set the stage, when you see a sexual stimuli, your brain releases dopamine to start the cascade for the sexual response. So when somebody views pornography, that stimulus of dopamine happens and the excitement ensues and it becomes interesting. Well, over time, that stimuli has to be more exciting to achieve the same level of neurotransmitter release. And for some brains, this can lead to an addiction or like seeking a new high, like we see with drugs and other things. Over here, there's mentioned a comparison between food and gambling and how, people consume more and more to try and achieve the same satisfaction and excitement. Well, the same thing happens with pornography, and that's where the addiction becomes. But then there's also the second category of people where they see the stimulus, now it's not as stimulating because of the persistent exposure, and so they become disinterested. And what that leads to is a problem with romantic relationships, because now you've seen more stimulating images or media on the internet or TV or wherever you're seeking your pornography, and now your romantic partner is no longer stimulating to you and you become disinterested. So what do we do with all of this? There's no official diagnosis in the DSM-5 to do with a pornography addiction. Right now, it kind of fits under the hypersexuality phase, and so there are some classifications for that. Basically, 6 months of having intense sexual fantasies, behaviors consistent with the sexual desires and things that interfere with general activities of daily life because of those strong desires, and inability to cope because of these strong desires, engagement in risky behavior because of these desires. So that's how the DSM-5 is kind of looking at it. Is it affecting other parts of your life because of this addiction? But we also highlighted that it affects your function, your mental function, like I mentioned earlier. It affects relationships. It affects the physiology in your brain and the anatomy in your brain, and it changes all of that. So it can lead to risky sexual behavior and sexual dysfunction or disinterest in romantic relationships because of all of that. So how do we treat it? There are different coping strategies that are listed here, like rebuilding relationships and those people helping and supporting you through it, managing stress so that you don't feel like you have to seek it out, finding other ways to cope with your stress, identifying what triggers those sexual desires so you can avoid or mitigate those, and finding alternative behaviors that are less destructive. Exercise, healthy activities, or other interesting hobbies. This Ocean Recovery is a group that's working to support people that are dealing with internet addiction or pornography addiction. And so we listed the link here. If that's something that you want to look into further, there's a lot of helpful resources and links to other supportive groups and things like that. So all in all, it's a really interesting topic. It was really intriguing to me to learn about how different stimuli can modify your brain, not just pornography, but all kinds of things in general. Like we mentioned, other addictions can have similar effects. There is a lot of this research is really inconclusive as to what to do moving forward and how to treat it. There is some interesting research that suggests that drugs that help with ending opioid addiction could also be helpful for pornography addiction, but it's inconclusive at this state. So thank you for taking time to watch this. Hopefully it was interesting to you. Have a great day.